Hey everyone, Cody here. And I don't know who needs to hear this, but you have to stop living under the expectations of other people. I'm going to give you two quick stories and how this can affect people in different ways. But if you're always constantly living under the expectations of other people and what they want, then you are going to get crushed and you're going to feel like the things that you do are never good enough. So I'm going to give you an example of myself and of my wife. And she doesn't know I'm sharing this, but I figure since I'm sharing my own thing, it wouldn't be so bad. Anyway, so when I was growing up, I lived most of my life with my mom. Well, I always lived with my mom, but uh, about, I think, 5 years old or so, she met my stepdad. And growing up, I was never the son that he wanted. Like he wanted a son, and he only had girls for the most part. So he, he had girls and always tried for a boy. He had four girls in a row, and I, was not the son he wanted. He wanted a son, but I didn't meet any of that criteria. Like he was into certain things, and I was into other things. And no matter how much I did, around the house, the chores that I did, the level of academics I did in school, the interests that I had, and even if I tried to take an interest in the things that he enjoyed, it was never good enough because I didn't really care. I was only doing it out of compulsion. My mom would be like, go, try to help him with the car or go watch football with him. And I just didn't really care about that stuff. One, I was younger, but two, also I just was more interested in computer and electronics and stuff, and he was more outdoors, football, that kind of stuff. So we never really saw eye to eye growing up, and nothing I ever did was good enough. So I never was able to meet his expectations, no matter how hard I worked or the grades that I got or the things I did around the house. It was just never enough. He was just always upset with me. He was always disappointed in me, and that crushed me. Growing up, I just was always like, I, nothing I ever did was good enough. And the effect of this is that when I met my wife and she already had kids, so I became a stepfather. I had the same expectations for her kids. And we oftentimes don't want to be our parents because we see a lot of bad traits in our parents. I'm not saying all parents are bad, or there's a lot of good things that our parents do, but we tend to take on a lot of the traits of our parents, good and bad. And that was one of the negative traits that I took on with because of my dad. So when I met my wife, girlfriend at the time, and we got together, we moved in together, and I kind of became a stepfather to her kids. I did the same thing. I had these high expectations that they could never meet. I expected, straight A's. I expected all of the chores to be done all the time, on time, immaculate. Um, I expected them to behave all the time. Like there was just no flexibility. There was no, room for them to be kids. There's no room for error, really. There was no grace. And grace is probably the best way I could put it because, grace is such a really religious word, I would say. Not necessarily like you have to use it religiously, but a lot of times when you hear the word grace, you think Jesus. And there's a reason for that because there was not a lot of grace or mercy in my house growing up. And so when I became an adult, I took that on and I was that way to my wife's kids. And the problem with this is that it creates a dissension and kind of a discord or a gap between you and them. Because if the kids are always trying and they do try their best, and you don't recognize that they are trying, but no matter how hard they try, they never reach these expectations, well, then they're just going to be discouraged and stop trying. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have high expectations or, high standards for our kids. Absolutely we should because the world is not going to set a lot of these standards for them. And we have to instill, standards in our kids growing up because one, they're impressionable, but two, we have to set those standards so that when they go out into the world, they already have those standards set because, when they go out in the world, if they have no standards, they're going to fall to a lot of things that the world is going to throw at them that are just not good. And so, it took me a few years, like years, to recognize how bad this really was. And my wife and I would fight about it. And eventually, after I got saved and after I kind of forgave my parents for a lot of the things they did to me, I was able to recognize that that was going on. My wife and I finally had a talk about it, and she kind of pointed it out. And I had to humble myself and be like, yeah, you know what? All these years I have had very little grace for my kids. And I'm getting kind of sad about it, but I think about how much grace God has had for me and all of the things that I've done. And oftentimes we tend to look at God as a reflection of how we see our own parents, namely our father. And so, because my father was never happy with me, my stepfather, because my stepfather was never happy with me and nothing I ever did was good enough, I felt the same way towards God, like I could never measure up. And God is not like that. God is above all that. He does not see us that way, but we see him that way because we just have this earthly lens. So eventually I did, I was kind of broken of that. I had to humble myself and I had to undo a lot of that stuff. And, not that I ever got perfect or still don't struggle with it from now, every now and then. It's not nearly as bad as it was. And it's not, kind of my default anymore. So that's one effect of just living under someone else's expectations, is that people are going to fail you. So if you hold them up to this expectation they can never reach, they're going to keep failing and you're always going to be disappointed. So there's got to be high standards, but there's got to be room for grace and error, because people are broken, people are messed up, people make mistakes or they make bad choices. That's gonna happen, and especially in parenting, when you're looking at your own kids, kids are dumb, and they make a lot of stupid decisions. Heck, even as adults, we still do that, but kids especially, right? And so we have to have some of that room for error, for grace, and for mercy. Now, I'm gonna flip it and talk about my wife's situation. So my wife, kind of a similar situation, where she has always lived under the expectations of her father and her stepmother, and every year for holidays, we've always had to conform our schedule, like our family schedule, our immediate family, to their schedule. So essentially, my mother in law, his stepmother in law, yeah, I guess it'd be my stepmother in law, um, we've always conformed to their holiday schedule. And they do this, they try to do the same thing every year for Halloween, for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And every year, we have always struggled with conforming to that schedule, because our family, we have a lot of kids. We have 7 kids between my wife and I. And our family's only getting bigger, because our older kids, they're older and they're not in the house, but now they have boyfriends and girlfriends that they have to go see the family of, or they have a spouse that they have to go see the family of. But then also, our 3 youngest kids are adopted. They have family that they want to see, or that family wants to see them. So it's like we're trying to fit, our family and then our parents and then our kids' spouses, and there's just so many moving pieces to that schedule. But even with all of that chaos, we have always tried to fit our schedule around this umbrella of my wife's parents' schedule. And on top of that, we have my wife's, mom and stepdad. So it's like we have all these pieces, right? And unfortunately, our family has just gotten so big that we just can't feasibly hit up everybody and not be stressed out about it. And my wife is an amazing woman. I love my wife to death. But one thing my wife struggles with is people pleasing. Like, she just doesn't like to let people down. And again, this is kind of the effect of expectations. So because she doesn't want to let them down, she always tries to, fit around their schedule. Even if it really does not work with us, every year we've always fit around that schedule because she doesn't want to let her dad and stepmom down. And it kind of came to a head this year because we knew, they were going to eventually want to talk about the holidays. And we weren't initially going to go over for Halloween, because my wife knew that as soon as we go over for Halloween, they're going to talk about Thanksgiving and Christmas. And she did not want to tell them that this year was going to be different. My wife and I have gone back and forth about setting our own traditions for our family, with me and her and our kids, because it's our family now. It's great to have traditions with your extended family, But at some point, you have to make your own traditions as a married couple. And we kind of have that, but we have still always followed, these other expectations. And my wife and I were talking about like, look, we need to set this year. Like we can't keep doing this. Like we're kind of burning the candle at both ends and we're just getting worn out. And my wife was afraid to kind of talk to them about that. She didn't want to hurt their feelings and she didn't want, that backlash. And I was like, look, we got to. And, my wife and I go through therapy. There's nothing wrong with us per se. It's just we go through family therapy because there are things that our kids have been through. There's things that, we've been through, especially my wife has been through that she never really worked through. And not to put her on blast, like just, advocating for good therapy. We have a good Christian counselor or therapist, I should say. And, it's been really beneficial. But even in that, she was talking about like, hey, you got to set these boundaries. Like it comes down to boundaries, right? These are the boundaries and you've got to set them. Because if you never set the boundaries, then people are just going to keep overstepping them. And even when you do set them, they may still keep overstepping them for a while until you are firm enough to say, no, like this isn't going to happen anymore. So anyway, we had that conversation around Halloween. And sure enough, a few days later, her stepmom reached out and was like, hey, can you come over? Can the family meet up? We got to talk about Thanksgiving and Christmas. And so, we go over there. We already kind of knew what the expectation was. And my wife was, we talked about it before. I was like, look, you got to tell her, like, we're not doing this year. And she's like, I know. And she was struggling with it. I know she was. So we go over and they start talking about the plans. And of course, their plan is the same thing as it has been in the years past, but it just doesn't work for us. And so, she's trying to kind of tell them that it doesn't work for us this year. And so everybody's like trying to kind of come up with a new solution. Let's do it this day or this time, or, can we do it for a different time that works for everybody? And pretty much everybody else was already on board for the regular time, like the scheduled time that they've always done, because they're okay with following that schedule. For us, it just doesn't work anymore. And so my wife is like, oh, okay, I guess we can do this other thing and maybe do this other thing. But luckily, my wife's stepbrother was there and he was like, look, is it that this time doesn't work for you or you just don't want to do it? And finally, my wife was like, yeah, I can't do it. It doesn't work for us. And she finally broke and told them like, hey, we're going to have to set up our own traditions. It doesn't work. And this is kind of how the way it's going to be. And I was so proud of her. And she finally said that. And, the stepmom actually kind of told us why she always did it the same time all the time. And she actually kind of understood. I don't know that it went over as well as possible, but it went over okay, right? And you just kind of have to expect that. But for the most part, my wife was able to share what she truly felt about the situation and say, look, we just can't do this anymore. And this is how it's going to be. And the backlash actually wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. And they didn't like it. But at the same time, now it's on the table. And my wife, I could tell that afterwards, my wife felt nauseous, right? She was sick after having to deal with that, but she felt better, and I think that there's this, because you lift this weight. I think a lot of anxiety that people have is that they don't want to deal with conflict or confrontation. I understand it's uncomfortable. I understand it's not great to deal with things head on, but it truly is the way to go. It truly is like the path to the the least amount of anxiety and depression and all this other stuff, because a lot of times people just have the feelings and they have like all this adrenaline that kind of isn't going anywhere in their body, and they want to just medicate it, or they want to go out and they want to exercise and they want to do all these things to distract themselves, but they're not really dealing with the issue. And if you don't deal with the issue, it's just going to keep coming up and coming up and coming up. So anyway, going back to it, my wife finally told them and it was great. We actually had Thanksgiving and we did it on our terms and it was actually really good. So I suppose out of all of this, my point is that you cannot live under the expectations of someone else. You just cannot, because if you're constantly living under other people's expectations, you're going to be depressed. You're going to be anxious. You're going to feel overwhelmed, and you're going to feel underappreciated at the same time. And it's just not healthy. All of that stuff just kind of weighs on you, takes up mental space, and it actually dictates your actions. Why do you want to let someone else dictate your life? It's your life, not anyone else's. I mean, technically, I would say from a Christian standpoint, our bodies belong to God, right? And our lives should be in submission to Him. But as far as, living your life, you're not a robot. God didn't just give us life to say, hey, now come back and do this. Like, we still have a choice, and we still have a way that we approach things. So ultimately, I guess that's the end of the video. I know there wasn't a lot of like scripture or anything in here. I just thought it would be a good video to make and to share. And I hope that it means something to someone, because you can't live under the expectations of other people. That's just about it. That's about it. See ya.